we're good.
Good morning. This is Mickey Sanders, Vice Chair of the Board of Real Estate Appraisers. It is 9 a.m. This is a public meeting of the Board of Real Estate Appraisers. We will now call this meeting to order. Let's begin by having the Division Director perform a roll call.
Mickey Sanders.
Here.
Christy McFarland.
Here.
Chris Chippendale.
Here.
Larry Stark.
Here.
Patrice Campbell.
Here.
Clint Taylor.
Here.
Tony Pastilli is going to be late, so he's not here right now, but you do have a quorum.
Thank you. Can I have a motion to approve the board meeting minutes from January 5th, 2023?
This is
So
Chris.
moved.
Yep.
I do have a motion to approve the minutes. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. There has been a motion and a second to approve the meeting minutes. Is there any discussion?
No.
Hearing none. All right, we will now take a vote. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say no. All right, the motion passes. Next on the meeting are other matters. Does anyone on the board commission have any other matters they would like to bring to the board's attention to discuss? Great. Seeing none, I will move on to policy matters. The first thing I'd like to address is before I introduce the public forum, is the first issue is update on Montana regulations on coursework regarding appraiser professionalism. And I know that Tony and Larry, I know Larry's here, but Tony is one of the members that wanted to speak on that. Should we move that in the agenda until Tony's here?
You can definitely do that.
And do we have to have a motion to do that, or can we just do that?
No, you can just do it.
Okay, so as soon as Tony is here, then we will go ahead and get to that issue. All right, the next issue is the citizen participation period. Any person may bring their concerns about matters not on the agenda before the board. Speakers are requested to limit their remarks to 2 minutes unless additional time is allowed by the board. Is there anyone who has signed up to speak or anyone who wishes to speak at this time? Eric, if you're speaking, you're on mute. And still on mute. And I'm not sure if he's speaking to us. I don't know if we have any citizens signed up.
If you can hear me,
Now we can.
if anybody from the public would like to address the board, just hit the hand icon and we'll call your name and unmute you. And Madam Chair, I do not see anybody that wishes to address the board.
Thank you. The next item is Code of Ethics for Boards and Commissions.
So, Madam Chair, before we get into that, can we introduce the new board member?
Oh,
who's Clint
please.
Taylor.
Please, thank you.
He is the AMC representative, and I will let Clint introduce himself to all of you. And then if you guys can introduce yourselves and just kind of give some background about your history and your representation on the board.
Good morning, everyone. Happy to be here. Very excited to meet you all. I'm excited to learn from you all and obviously give my input and help serve the public. Again, Clinton Taylor, Ascend Appraisal Solutions Group, local AMC here to Colorado. One of the very, very, very few. So very excited again to continue. And looking forward to these meetings and all of you.
Clint, it's nice to meet you. I'm Larry Stark and have been on the board for a couple of years now. I'm a commercial real estate appraiser. Our corporate offices in Colorado with national evaluation consultants. So happy to have you aboard and look forward to your input.
Okay, Gina, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, sure. I am not a board member, Mr. Taylor, I'm serving as your general counsel today. I think Chris Aguilar was the one who did your new member orientation and you met with him. Chris has sadly left Berea as their attorney, so I am trying and will be struggling to fill those big shoes today.
Great.
And welcome. Nice to see
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, well then let's just go ahead. I'll start. My name is Mickey Sanders. I'm the vice chair. I serve as the public member and I have been on the board for about 3 years now.
Nice to meet you.
Good
Your
morning,
turn.
Clint. This is Chris Chippendale. I've been on the board about a year and a half now. I'm with End Credit Union and I'm the representative from kind of the banking credit union space.
Nice to meet you, Chris.
Welcome.
Good morning, Clint. My name is Christy McFarland. I'm the assessment community representative. So I'm the Gunnison County assessor. I'm coming to the end of my second term, so 6 years with Borea, and welcome to the board.
6 years, wow, that's awesome.
I'll go next. My name is Patrice Campbell. I've been on the board for almost 6 years also, and I came originally as the eminent domain representative. I also have experience from the assessor side and both residential and commercial fee appraisal world.
Thanks, Patrice. Oh, Marcia, go ahead.
And then Tony Pastilli, who isn't here yet, but he will be joining us probably around 10, is a certified residential appraiser. And I believe he also has experience with appraisal management companies as well. So that is the entire composition of the board.
Great group, excellent.
Thank you. Welcome, Clinton. And here we go. So the next item is the Code of Ethics for Boards and Commissions.
So board members, this is just part of a larger project that has been happening within the department. It's focused on standardizing our boards and commissions and our processes. And we have been kind of absent of one of these Code of Ethics previously. This is borrowed heavily from the Division of Professions and Occupations. And basically, this is just something to really kind of lay out the expectations of our board members. It's already been presented to the Real Estate Commission and the Board of Mortgage Loan Originators. It would have been presented to you first if we had not canceled your March meeting. But this is just basically to kind of set the standards for your service on a board, and also if we do task forces. And does anybody have any questions about it? So if there's no questions, what I do need you guys to do is sign and return at least the signature page to us, because we are just keeping record of that.
Okay. And Doreen will be sending those out today.
So if you're able to sign the ones that was in your packet, that would be great. But if we need to send them out individually, we can do that as well.
Okay, thank you. All right, the next item is, does anyone have any agenda items for the next meeting?
So Marcia, you sent out that that information on the appraisal bias. Is there anything we need to discuss for that, or anything that would be good for the board to bring up?
You know, if they make any sort of advancements on what the AQB is going to do, then we'll put it on your agenda. But I know that they're still in the exposure draft phase, and I think a lot of what's going to happen if they modify the ethics rule, there's going to be significant guidance in FAQs, and I just don't know how soon they're going to get that done as well. But as soon as they get something finalized, we can put that on your board agenda for discussion.
Okay, thank you.
All right, hearing no more comments or questions or concern, we will go ahead and move into complaint matters.
So
Okay,
are you ready?
I
Board
am.
members, complaint matter A is case number 2022-1771. This is an investigation that was completed by Rob Walker. In this case, the complainant alleged that the respondent inaccurately reported the subject's condition and quality of construction, as well as used inappropriate comparable sales. In reviewing the report and work file, several potential USPAP violations were discovered. There appeared to be scope of work, record keeping, and ethics issues. The respondent also failed to adequately analyze the subject's neighborhood and market area, the current market conditions, and the comparable sales. There was no documented analysis of the comparable sales selection. There was little to no support for the adjustments in the sales comparison approach and the lack thereof. There was support for the site value, and one of the stated reasons for not developing the cost approach was that it was not required by the client. There were insufficient summaries of analysis to support the opinions and conclusions made in the report. Finally, there appeared to be a potential ethics violation for certifying exterior inspections that were done on the comparable sales when there was evidence that this was not true. Possible violations include 12-10-710 1G and H, Board Rule 12.4 and 12.8, Competency Rule, Ethics Rule, Scope of Work Rule, Record Keeping Rule, and violations of Standards 1 and 2. The recommendation for this case is a stipulation for diversion with work product review of 4 appraisals in 2 months, coursework of the 15-hour National USPAP course, advanced residential application and case studies, which is 15 hours or more, 7 or more hours of comparative analysis and or supporting adjustments, and Berea's reliable record keeping course. Rob Walker is here to answer any questions that you may have.
Hey, Rob, Larry, I have, thank you first for your review. And I think the thing that concerned me beyond the fact that the report just wasn't well done was the potential ethics violation. Could you give a little more detail on that, indicating that he had seen the comps, but he hadn't, perhaps?
Well, he had certified that he had went to all the comps. There was one particular one that the report actually had the wrong photo in there. So the photo itself was for the wrong property. So it was fairly obvious that he hadn't seen that property. Also, another one was I believe it was in the town of La Vita, and he kind of vaguely described the area, which was nowhere near
Right.
the area, as well as it had the MLS photo in it as well.
I guess what bothers me about that is we only have our integrity, and if we're willing to perhaps be dishonest with regards to whether we inspected an asset, what else might we do? So that, the report wasn't well done. I agreed with all your comments about the report. It was just that overshadowed things for me. So I don't really have any.
I agree with you, Larry. And also, it doesn't take long to just even say I didn't physically inspect this. It doesn't make it a bad thing. It just means you didn't get to go there. Just be honest about it. And if it was an oversight, it was just another one of the many kind of material,
right,
errors in the report. So.
Because we don't have empirical evidence to state that it was an ethical violation, I think that I have to err to exactly what Patrice just said, which was it was just another of many errors in the report, and somebody was moving too fast and indicated that they had inspected everything and they hadn't. But that was discouraging to me.
Because we're asking them to do 4 reports, I don't know, it seems like a lot of education, but maybe it's warranted. I don't know. That kind of struck me as, but maybe that's fine.
So could you, Rob, could you tell us again what you're recommending, all the education? We went through it pretty quickly.
Actually, Marcia does the recommendations.
Okay.
I don't recommend anything.
All right, Marcia, would you mind walking us back through it again quickly?
So the recommendation is for a stipulation for diversion work product review of 4 appraisals in 2 months, the 15-hour national USPAP course, 15 hours of advanced residential applications and case studies, 7 hours or more of comparative analysis and or supporting adjustments, and then Berea's reliable record keeping class.
Is that a new class, that last one? Or just
No,
renamed?
it's just renamed. Usually we
Okay.
just call it the work file class, but it's been around for, I think, maybe close to 2 years at this point.
Okay.
So it's about
same
40
one.
hours of education and then 4 reports. So
I guess that's not that bad.
Yeah.
It's-
that's, I mean, it's a fair amount, but the report was really poor. So I would concur with that.
Marcia,
I have a question, or for Marcia. Is it, and I apologize for my ignorance on this, are these 4 brand new reports that will be needed to be reviewed?
So they would be 4 reports that, he's already been engaged by a client to do, and then he will have to pay to have somebody review them.
Understood. The reason for my question is just the market in the area that he covers, 4 reports might take a while to get to if it was brand new reports. That's why I asked.
So I'm not sure. I know that this report was in Walsenburg, and he had indicated to the client that he doesn't make it down to Walsenburg very often, but I don't know what areas he may practice in. So we would look, if he regularly appraises in Pueblo, 4 appraisals from the Pueblo area would be fine.
Marcia, a question for you. Now that we're in the new year and we're able to assess fines, and this is probably a question just from consistency for the rest of the meeting, what is your kind of standard of when to fine, when not to? And I'm not necessarily saying we should here, but I saw sometimes there is a recommendation and sometimes there isn't. So again, being newer to this, I'm just curious what that maybe looks like.
So it's completely up to the board whether they want to fine in each case or not. Usually what I try to take into account is appraiser education costs more than some of our other programs. So adding into the factor that you also have work product review, which is going to bear an expense for this appraiser as well. Between the work product review and the education, it just seemed to kind of then push it a little over by imposing a fine. But that's just my perspective.
Okay, no, that's helpful. I appreciate that.
Any more discussion, any more questions? All right, then, do I have a motion to accept staff's recommendation in case 2022-1771?
I'll make the motion. This is Larry.
Thanks,
And
Larry.
this is Patrice, I will second that.
All right, we have a motion and a second. May I have the aye votes?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays?
Aye.
All right, then in case 2022-1771, we accept staff's, the motion is approved to accept staff recommendation.
So board members, complaint matter B is case number 2022-1791. In this case, the complaint filed on behalf of the board alleged that the respondent used inappropriate comparable sales due to location, site size, finished living area, quality of construction, condition, and amenities. The respondent failed to provide a response or her work file. In reviewing the report, several potential USPAP violations were discovered. There appeared to be scope of work and record keeping rule issues. The respondent also failed to adequately analyze the subject's neighborhood and market area, the current market conditions, and the comparable sales. There was no documented analysis of the comparable sales selection. There was little to no support for the adjustments in the sales comparison approach. There was insufficient summaries of the analysis to support the opinions and conclusions made in the report. Possible violations include 12-10-7101G, Board Rule 13.4, Scope of Work Rule, and then violations of Standards 1 and 2. This particular appraiser had a prior 2018 dismissal with subsequent education that required the completion of coursework in 7 hours of how to support and prove your adjustments, work file and record keeping, and also the residential cost approach. Our recommendation this time is for a stipulation for diversion, a fine of $1,000, and coursework of 7 hours or more in sales comparison, the sales comparison approach, and then also residential report writing and case studies of 15 hours. And Rob Walker is your investigator, and he's here to answer any questions that you may have.
So Rob, you got no response at all?
No, I did not. And the kind of the unusual thing is there was an earlier complaint that she had not, the client and intended user had not received the report. I actually contacted her and she sent the report. And I said, hey, send me a copy of the report as well. And then when I saw the deficiencies, we filed a complaint. After 3 attempts of sending a response, we got no response whatsoever.
And so do we attempt to reach them via phone, email, and how do we try to reach them? I just want to make sure, because I find it particularly disturbing whenever there is an investigation and there's no response to it. So, I mean, is it possible that we were trying to reach at a wrong location, wrong number?
Well, I sent her I emailed her 3 times, and I believe I don't have a record of it, but I believe I attempted to call as well.
And she responded to your email at one point.
Yeah, she responded to the one that was when the client wanted the report, because the report had never been sent.
You had the right contact information.
Yes. And I got the contact information from our site. So
and the complaint would have, oh, sorry. The complaint would have gone out by mail also?
No, just email.
The original complaint. Okay. So when the only notification that people receive is by email?
That is correct.
And Rob, the complaint really was just that the report hadn't been delivered to the intended user or to an intended user, right? It wasn't a complaint about the report itself, and then you got a copy, reviewed it, and found these issues.
Exactly.
Right.
And to be honest, the report really was not horrendous. It was just the fact that she didn't respond.
Right.
That's the issue.
So, Ms. Waters, this is the first time in my couple of years that I recall somebody just not responding. I mean, is there a protocol for somebody that just won't address the board?
That's the reason for the recommendation for the fine.
Okay.
And just so you know, I mean, so most of our complaint notifications are going out via email these days, and you have a rule that says that they have to keep their contact information current with us, and that includes email addresses. And we do make multiple attempts to try to reach them because we would rather have even a very light response than no response at all.
Right. Well, I mean, I guess my perspective is I don't believe we can do our job as a board. I don't think that the investigator Rob in this case can do his job well. The whole system is based upon the need for us all to address issues, respond, and understand. So, yeah, and Rob, I guess my comment was when I was looking at the report before I realized that there was no response. I mean, the report's not as bad as some we've seen, right? It was, and in a secondary or tertiary market, it's not an easy one. But so I guess my perspective was the report wasn't that bad, but it's a blatant kind of disrespect that there was no response. If in fact that response, if they received all the communication, we have to assume that they did. So. Those are all my comments.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, there's not much we can do if someone doesn't communicate with us.
Right. I agree with the recommendation for the fine just because of the lack of communication. Otherwise, I would think that that's pretty steep and significant fine, but maybe that'll serve as a bit of a wake-up call that you've got to play by the rules. So,
Great. Would you like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion that we accept Ms. Waters' recommendations for the coursework and for the
So do I have a second?
Second,
I'll second.
All right. May I have a vote of the ayes?
aye.
Aye.
Nays? All right, then it's been moved and seconded in court in case number 2022-1791 to accept staff recommendation.
Okay, so board members, complaint matter C is case number 2022-2029. In this case, the complainant alleged that the respondent conspired with the other co-owner to inflate the subject's opinion of value. He also alleged that the appraiser used inappropriate comparable sales due to location, gross living area, quality of construction, condition, and amenities. In reviewing the report, several potential use violations were identified. There appeared to be scope of work, record keeping, and possible ethics rules violations. There was no documented analysis of the comparable sales selection and insufficient support for the adjustments in the sales comparison approach. There were insufficient summaries of analysis to support the opinions and conclusions made in the report. Possible violations include 12-10-613 1F and G, ethics rule, scope of work rule, record keeping rule, and standards rules 1 and 2. And this appraiser has a 2022 dismissal with subsequent education that required completion of coursework in record keeping and land and site value. The recommendation for this case is a stipulation for diversion, a fine of $500, 15 hours of national USPAP course, 7 hours of appraising complex properties, and then also 4 hours of divorce and estate appraisals. The investigation was completed by Rob Walker, and he is here to answer any questions that you may have.
Well, Rob, you were busy, seems like, here with a lot of different investigations. So my question is, what evidence did you find with regards to the allegation that there was a conspiracy to inflate the value?
I really didn't find any real strong evidence about that. I know that he was concerned that the complainant was concerned that the vast majority of the dialogue was between his co-owner and the appraiser. When he did ask, basically for a reconsideration of value, the guy kind of said, let's talk about it on the phone. I don't want to put anything in writing, sort of thing. But as far as proof of true, conspiring, I really didn't see strong evidence of that.
Right. And then the potential ethics violation, could you give us a bit more detail on that?
That mainly had to do with a addition that was on the back of the house. It was kind of an odd, it was actually initially permitted by the county as a garage addition, but they actually finished it into a living space. The real issue was it was connected to the lower level, and he had actually used it as above grade GLA. What made it misleading was the actual sketch in the report, where it showed it being attached to the first level as opposed to the basement or lower level.
Was that the 1,000 square foot addition? Was that the one?
Yes, that is correct.
So that could have been just a mistake, right? I mean, for it to be ethics, we would have to. So that's why you said potential, because for it to be a real ethics violation, we'd kind of have to know that was his intent, was to mislead, as opposed to. Am I correct in that, Ms. Waters? I mean, the intent to mislead versus with an error in misleading.
Well, I think you can look at it in two different ways, and then Gina can also chime in if she'd like to. But so you've got the intent to mislead versus a series of errors that make the report not credible.
Right.
Which seems more like what happened here. It just seemed like this appraiser was not really a little bit out of their league in knowing how to deal with those extra buildings and evaluation techniques to value those. Just seemed kind of strange there too.
Yeah, to me, when I looked through this report, it seemed like an issue of mentorship. There were some oddities, and there was the attempts to do the analytics didn't seem to have kind of the standard methodologies, and maybe some of the additional education that's recommended will help with that. Before we conclude, I'd like to go back through the recommendations again, but others may have questions.
So
Go
do you want
ahead.
me to give the recommendation again? The recommendation is for a stipulation for diversion, a fine of $500, the 15-hour national use PAP course, appraising complex properties for 7 hours, divorce and estate appraisals for 4 hours.
So 25
In
hours.
talking to this appraiser, do you think that will help, or do you think a mentoring and an appraisal would be another option? Did you get a sense from that?
I think in general, he knows what he's doing. I don't think it's a mentoring a thing. I think as far as like this addition, I think his basic argument is the market would recognize this as gross living area, even though it was on the lower level, just because there was very, very little below grade. I do think there was some issues with the additional dwelling unit and addressing some of the outbuildings. But in general, I think he's fairly well schooled and qualified.
Okay.
Just maybe not in these odd properties, so this education may help.
Yeah,
Well,
this was an odd one.
Yeah, and he certainly had a complete work file. I mean, it was 1,000 pages or something. So he gathered a lot of data. So if there are no further comments, I would make the motion that we accept the fine and the coursework of 25 hours or so that are recommended.
Was that your motion, Larry?
That was my motion, yeah.
Great. Do I have a second?
I second that motion.
Great. Then in case number 2022-2029, we have a motion and a second to accept staff recommendation. May I have a vote of the ayes?
Aye.
Aye.
Any nays? All right, it's adopted.
So board members, complaint matter D is case number 2022-2125. The complaint, which was filed on behalf of the board, alleged that the respondent used inappropriate comparable selection due to location, site, age, and condition. There was also inadequate research verification and analysis for the adjustments made or not made. In reviewing the report, several potential use PAP violations were discovered. There appeared to be scope of work, record keeping, competency, and ethics rules violations. The respondent also failed to adequately analyze the subject's neighborhood and market area, the current market conditions, and the comparable sales. There was no documented analysis of the comparable sales selection. There was little to no support for the adjustments in the sales comparison approach. And there were insufficient summaries of analysis to support the opinions and conclusions made in the report. Possible violations include 12-61-7101G, the competency rule, the ethics rule, the scope of work rule, the record keeping rule, and standards rules 1 and 2. The recommendation for this is a final agency order, a fine of $500, and coursework in residential report writing and case studies, which is 15 hours, 5 hours or more of data verification, 7 hours or more of comparable analysis, and or supporting adjustments. The Appraisal Foundation's course in scope of work, appraisals and inspections, and the board's class in reliable record keeping.
How many hours is that in total?
Give me a minute.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
I'm having a Chevy Chase moment of I didn't think there would be math, but it looks like I think probably around 25 would be the total. I'm not, I think the TAF course is 4 hours.
Okay.
No, so that'd be 31 or 32 hours of education. Rob Walker is your investigator, and he's here to answer any questions that you may have.
Does anyone have any questions or comments for Rob?
I hate to be the only one here, but I got lost in this report a bit when I was going through it. I mean, I know that the comps were difficult because this was, you know, it was in Brighton. I think it was in Brighton, if I'm remembering the right one. But it was relatively remote. So I guess one of the questions I had, Rob, you were talking about inadequate selection or inappropriate selection of comp data. We're not charged with seeing, going to the market to see if there's other better data available. But did you look? Did you feel like that there were better comps that could have been selected for this?
Yeah, I really didn't go look for the comps, but some of them, like I believe, like comp 4 was nowhere even in his selection process. So this is like somewhere they just kind of pulled out of the blue, and really I have no idea how he even found it. And his reasoning that instead of reasoning there was an ADU. However, like in the MLS, it doesn't even say that there was an ADU there, and it was not even really close in condition, style, age, location to anything. So I think my main thing is if when I ask the question of how do you find these comps, I'm just looking for a fairly reasonable explanation of how it came apart, not just they just kind of, this one kind of came in out of the blue. I think probably for this case, and to kind of clarify, I think the biggest issue was that he this case was related to an earlier case where the client wasn't happy with the initial appraisal value. They hired him to review the other one, the earlier appraisal, and then he made his own wrote his own report. The main issue that I felt was that once there was a legal case against the previous appraiser, this appraiser was contacted by the earlier appraiser's attorney, and at that point he did a revision without being requested by the client, and he actually lowered the value and never even sent the new revised report to the client.
Well, I also found that this person has a certified general license, and they use some strange terminology, that like they didn't quite, they used was this the one they used the assessor's value for the land and called it an allocation approach, which I'm not sure what that is. It just seemed like there was some, and it was a confusing whole report, and from beginning to end. And
like I said, I got lost in it. So I, agreed. And you just mentioned that I missed that it was a certified general. I wonder how often this person is doing residential appraisal, but Rob, my last question would be, as you were interviewing the individual, I didn't listen to the interview. Was there a rationale for some of this? And they seem knowledgeable with regards to residential appraisal.
I think he was. I think probably the first his initial report was just kind of rushed and haphazard. And then it seems as though what I think is probably the larger issue is that he revised the report once he saw that there might be legal implications, and he revised it without being asked, just to kind of clean up some of the sloppiness from the initial report.
And,
I mean,
Rob, did you ever, oh, I'm sorry, Larry. I was just gonna ask, what was his response as it associates to why he did not communicate this? Like after he changed the value, why did he not correspond or communicate that out?
He said he did. He told me that
Okay.
he sent it out, but the client never received the report, nor were they aware of a report.
To be clear, when we recognize that we've made a mistake or that we would like to modify a document because we realize we haven't done the job that we intended to do, we have the right to do that. We also have the obligation to inform the intended user, the client, if you will, that we found a mistake or that we see that we were sloppy and we want to correct it. So that's, admirable, I think, that you make those changes. On the other hand, we do have the obligation to tell our client that the report's been modified, particularly if there's a value change. So, again, if he said that he sent it out, even though the client didn't receive it, I can't assert that there was dishonesty there. So, but that is a concern. So,
Isn't this the one where a couple of the comps were quite far away, considering it's in Brighton? And were there anything closer? Or?
The only one that was the furthest away. The others were within a couple of miles, so the location generally was not that bad. It was just the one comp that he used for the ADU was like 9 miles away, and on the a lot size that was 4 times the size. The house was 3 times the size, and considerably. I would say the quality of construction and condition was considerably higher.
Okay, maybe that's what I was thinking of. Getting confused on which ones I looked at.
Yeah, me too.
So Ms. Waters, in addition to the 31 hours, there was a recommendation of a $500 fine. Is that right?
Correct.
To me, the recommendation for education and fines seem reasonable. If there aren't any other comments, I'll make a motion that we accept Ms. Waters' recommendation. And so that's my motion.
Do I have a second?
Second?
Great. May I have a vote of the ayes?
Aye.
Aye.
Any nays? All right, then, in case number 2022-2125, the board agrees to accept staff recommendation.
To board members, board matter E is case number 2022-823. In this case, the complaint alleged that the respondent failed to disclose his personal and professional relationship with the borrower of the subject property, or the fact that he had completed another appraisal assignment within the past 3 years. In reviewing the report in the work file, there appeared to be potential USPAP violations of the scope of work, record keeping, and ethics rules. There was insufficient analysis of the subject's market area, current market conditions, comparable sales selection, and the support of the adjustments made or lack thereof. Finally, there was inadequate commentary and summaries for the opinions and conclusions made in the report. Potential violations include 12-10-613 1B and 1G, Board Rule 12.8, the scope of work rule, the record keeping rule, the ethics rule, and standards 1 and 2. The recommendation is for a stipulation for diversion, the 15-hour national USPAP course, 7 hours or more of comparative analysis and or supporting adjustments, the reliable record keeping course. And then I have a recommendation in here for a fine if the board so chooses, but I didn't have a recommended amount. Rob Walker is your investigator. There is a companion case that follows this one, but Rob can answer any questions that you may have. And if you want, I can, if you would
Go
like,
ahead.
I can read the summary for the next investigative matter. You can discuss them as a pair or just do them individually.
I think it would be helpful to understand if there are errors or issues that are similar between the two. So if you don't mind reading the second one, I think it would be helpful.
Okay, so board matter F is case number 2022-2126. The appraisal for this complaint is essentially the same as 2022-823. And 823 is the supervisory appraiser. This was initiated on the board's own motion. The initial complaint pertained to a lack of disclosure of personal and professional relationships that might have potentially affected the objectivity and independence of the assignment. The Berea allegations against the respondent included inappropriate comparable sales selection, inadequate research and analysis, a lack of documented support for the adjustments. In reviewing the report, several potential use PEPs were discovered. There appeared to be violations of the scope of work, record keeping rules, and ethics rules. The respondent also failed to adequately analyze the subject's neighborhood and market area, the current market conditions, and the comparable sales. There was no documented analysis of the comparable sales selection and little to no support for the adjustments or lack thereof in the sales comparison approach. There were questions concerning the analysis of the cost approach as well. So with complaint matter F, the potential violations are 12-61-7101G, the ethics rule, the scope of work rule, the record keeping rule, and standards 1 and 2. And with that recommendation, we recommended a stipulation for diversion, a 15-hour national use PAP course, 7 hours or more of comparative analysis and or supporting adjustments, the reliable record keeping course, and then we also indicated a fine but didn't give you an amount. And Rob investigated both of them.
I also noticed there was no certification in there for the supervising appraiser. I'm just taking a wild guess here, but it almost seems like, and I think I read somewhere in there that the bank requested that the first complaint, they'd asked them to, the supervisory appraiser, to sign it. And I kind of questioned whether it was just okay, I'll sign it, but didn't really look at it or do the work. And the other appraiser, the second complaint, whichever number that was more of the person that wrote the appraisal. I mean, I don't know. Rob, did you get any feel on?
I would say this is a 50-50 at least.
Okay.
And it seemed as if the supervising appraiser really led a lot of the decision making, especially some of the comp selection on this. I mean, because one of the comps was almost 4 years old. It also appeared that price may have been a contributing factor in the comp selection as well.
And I know that those areas because that's where I used to live. So I would say that that a couple of those comps were in much more expensive neighborhoods.
So my question, Rob, would first be the issue of having not disclosed that you have a relationship with a party that's involved. I mean, we frequently will know people that we're doing an appraisal for, et cetera. So what was the extent of the issue? And I guess, it's, I don't think, clear in any of the matters exactly when we report. I mean, if I were doing an appraisal for Patrice, I know her professionally, I don't know her personally, and I don't know that I would really be obligated to say I know her. It's not a crime that you know somebody. On the other hand, if it's your brother-in-law or sister-in-law, you probably should report that it's a relative, and and let somebody make a decision about your ability to be unbiased. So
didn't they own other property together?
Yeah, they owned a plot of land together.
Okay.
as well as the borrower was the president of a mortgage company, and the signing appraiser stated to him that they were like their in-house appraisal company for his mortgage company. So there
Oh,
is a substantial
definitely
professional and personal relationship that
should have been
more than
this.
likely should have been disclosed.
And Ms. Waters is, so where does that fall? Does that fall under the ethics rule? Because that could be perception of bias, right? I mean,
Yeah, it falls under the ethics rule.
Where did
So-
the ethics rule would that fall under? And I think there's enough other things to talk about other than this, but I don't know that this appraiser had a personal interest that would affect the outcome of the appraisal, that he would be interested to the point that it would affect his impartiality.
and that's where I
that
was
alone,
going.
yeah, I don't know. I think this sounds like sour grapes. The complainant knows people that are involved in the transactions, and I don't know that knowing someone, to your point, Larry, is, is a bad thing. But being influenced by that relationship or having a financial interest in that property, yeah, then you probably should recuse yourself. I don't see that
Or-
here.
Or just
But-
even state it. I mean,
Yeah,
when all else fails, state it rather than leave it out. Then you've covered that section. Yep, we are related in this, but it doesn't matter in this appraisal.
So there's a couple things for recommending the violation of the ethics rule. One was the potential bias because of their professional and personal relationship. But then he also failed to disclose that he had previously appraised that property within the last 3 years.
separate thing, and I totally agree.
That was done after the fact, right, Marcia? Or Rob?
Pardon?
That was after the fact he disclosed that he appraised it in the last 3 years? After he'd already,
So I believe that Rob discovered that it was appraised in the last 3 years because Rob obtained a copy of that prior appraisal, and that led Rob to ask the questions about it.
Right.
Prior services relates to supervisory appraisers equal to the appraiser itself.
Well, I think, as Rob indicated, it appears that there was equal involvement by both appraisers in completing this appraisal. And so the term supervisory appraiser is kind of interesting because they're both certified residential appraisers. So the respondent in the second case didn't have to be supervised by the respondent in the first place, but they were both involved in this.
And I think they had asked the second appraiser to sign it. Didn't the client ask specifically to have it signed, Rob?
Well, that was another thing. We kind of got conflicting orders as well. So I don't think the record keeping wasn't great either. So there's nothing written from the client requesting him to sign it. However, it was alluded to by both of the appraisers on the report.
again, we come back to that communication, the fact that they're not disclosing this and it's coming out after the fact, even though it's a known relationship, is troubling, in my opinion. Regardless if it's a simple mistake, the way that it looks right now is it's not, it looks like it's definitely intertwined, in my personal opinion.
Yeah, Clint, I agree with you. There's a point of perception, right? Even if so.
Now, Marcia, I don't know what type of fine is levied, but I think it should be something considered due to the fact that we have two cases here that are intertwined.
So they just changed your fining authority, and I believe you can fine up to $1,000 per violation. This board typically doesn't do that, like I said earlier, just because of the expense of the coursework, but that at least gives you some idea of what the board can do if it wishes to impose a fine.
I'm gonna defer to the experience of the board. I'm the new guy and I'm not trying to come out with gun blazing and going after people, but I find these two complaints and these two matters are rather disturbing. But again, I will defer to the board.
Any other questions or comments? All right, so is it okay to combine these or do we have to do them separately when we vote on them?
It's probably cleaner to vote on them separately.
Okay, so the first on, excuse me, complaint number 2022-823. Do I have a motion to accept staff recommendation?
I'll make a motion.
Let me ask a quick question before there's a motion. So we have a recommendation for coursework in both of these. I'm assuming the recommendations are relatively similar. They would only need to take the classes a single time for both complaints. Is right, Ms. Waters?
Yeah, they would each take the coursework that the board requires them to take. So it would be the 3 classes.
Okay, all right. I'll make the motion that we accept. And I don't have an opinion with regards to the fine. Maybe somebody else should discuss that. I don't know that there needs to be a fine necessarily. So, Tony, do you have a perspective on that?
I would agree.
Yep.
Right, so motion, no fine, and we accept the coursework as proposed by Mrs. Waters. That's my
All right, great. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
May I have a vote of the ayes, please?
Aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
nays? All right, then in complaint matter 2022-823, the board agrees to accept staff recommendation. Now, is there any further discussion on complaint number, which we did get into a bit, but I want to give the opportunity if anyone has any discussion on 2022-2216. If not, maybe we have a motion.
I move to accept the staff's recommendations for complaint 2022-2216.
That's your motion. Do I have a second?
Second,
Great. May I
member
have-
Pistilli.
Great. We have a motion and a second. May I have a vote of the ayes, please?
Aye.
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 Any nays? Great. In complaint number 2022-2216, the board agrees to accept staff recommendation.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, I need to recuse myself. I have another meeting I need to go to.
Okay.
Everyone have a great day.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Christy. You too.
Thank you.
So board members, complaint matter G is case number 2022-2256. The allegations in this case included numerous errors throughout the report, specifically concerning the subject improvements and zoning. There were also issues with the comparable property selection due to location, condition, and amenities. In reviewing the report, several potential use PAT violations were discovered. There appeared to be scope of work, record keeping, ethics, and potential competency rule violations. The respondent also failed to adequately analyze the subject's neighborhood and market area, the current market conditions, and the comparable sales. It appeared the sales price was a major factor in the selection of the comparable sales. There was also an inadequate level of analysis and little to no support for the adjustments or lack thereof in the sales comparison approach. The cost approach was developed, but the methods used to determine the site value and the replacement costs were flawed and unsupported. The income approach was not considered, despite there being an active rental market with a significant amount of readily available information. Potential violations include 12-61-7101G, the competency rule, the scope of work rule, the record keeping rule, the ethics rule, and then standards rules 1 and 2. Recommendation in this case is a stipulation for diversion, 5 hours or more of data verification, 7 hours or more of comparative analysis and or supporting adjustments, 7 hours or more in appraising complex properties, and then reliable record keeping. We have also recommended a work product review of 4 appraisals in 2 months. Rob Walker is the investigator in this case, and he is available to answer any questions you may have.
Well, this was another confusing one on current condition and what the, it was a little bit misleading in the appraisal and even just some of the requests, because I understand these are complicated ones when they're trying to pick up those structures and put a new house and make it a new house, but it was a little bit confusing. So I don't know if you can share a little more, Rob, on that one.
Yeah, it looks like it's like a 100-plus-year-old home that they were actually raising the foundation, putting it in a new basement, as well as connecting it to an ADU. So it was a fairly complex thing. And the whole plan was fairly unclear. And the assignment was fairly unclear as far as what they were doing and what the new structure would actually look like.
Yeah, so I wasn't even sure if the square footage that was in the appraisal was current plus new. And again, I can't remember if this was a historical district and they actually had to save that portion of the house, which is very common in places, but I just got confused. So then I thought, well, it was a confusing request, but then that's our jobs to figure out what that request really is. So
yeah, it looked like they added the ADU that was built, because they also from the basement was connected to the garage, and there was an ADU on top of the garage, and I believe the ADU GLA was added into the original house as GLA, as well as they had some basement square footage all meshed together. It was kind of separated, but it was still fairly unclear. And the ANSI measurements were questionable at best, as well as she didn't even include any pictures of the existing interior of the home.
That was going to be my next question, and that was a little interesting, to say the least. Looking at it.
Hey, Rob, Larry. So the respondent discusses the ANSI standards and that they weren't educated, and had they realized that the report had to comply with those standards, that they would have withdrawn from the assignment, et cetera. Any perspective on that?
It was my impression that there was kind of like an overall lack of competency for this type of, it was probably too complex of an assignment to begin with. I think one of the major issues is that it appeared that, again, sales price was a major factor in the selection of the comparable properties, since there was huge differences in square footage and room count and bathroom count, lot size, age, quality. It seems like that was the number one factor, and it's the bit of comp selection she had in her work file. I mean, that was, the price point was a huge thing, as well as in her response to one of the lenders, or the lender said, hey, she suggested these other properties. And she said, well, if I would have, gone to that price point, it may have affected my opinion of value. So that kind of was a red flag.
And this was right next to a commercial.
Yeah.
It's right next to a parking lot, and which may or may not affect it. I don't know, but it just appears that she didn't even consider that as a possible adverse or external influence.
In her
So-
response to the complaint, there's a lot of I guesses, I should have, I miss. So she's admitting a little bit of her negligence or her lack of competency to complete this type of assignment.
There was, and there are some things like, I asked her about a potential time adjustment, and she said, "Oh, I never do time adjustments." It's, well, that could be an issue. And other things where, it's, kind of standard, standard adjustments as opposed to any sort of specific analysis performed. Typical.
Yeah,
for
and
the
in that
office.
time of the, in that market, in that time frame, 6 months could be significant. And I think,
Oh, could have made a 15% difference. I mean,
yeah.
so, Rob, though, there's not a requirement to show interior photos like through use PAP, et cetera. Was there a reason? I mean, for those of us who are looking at the report, we can only kind of assimilate data based on the photographs and the narrative. Was there a reason for not having interior photographs?
I believe she said something to the fact that she thought it might be misleading if she had interior photographs of the current property before the construction actually occurred, the addition and updating.
And did we have information of the, now I can't remember, of the, what the plans look like finished?
Yes, there was that was in the work file, as
Yeah.
well as I believe there was a contract with the construction company. So there was plans and a budget.
I mean, it was definitely a difficult appraisal to do. It just this is one that perhaps this appraiser shouldn't have attempted or should have gotten assistance, and they said as much, kind of in their response to you, not directly, but that that they should have done a lot of things that they didn't in fact do. Ms. Waters, I mean, do you mind, again, it was a bit ago that you told us the coursework. I'm sorry to keep asking you to repeat it all, but would you mind going through the coursework now that we've discussed it, that you've recommended?
No problem. So for this one, it's a stipulation for diversion, 5 hours or more of data verification, 7 hours or more of comparative analysis and or supporting adjustments, 7 hours or more in appraising complex properties, reliable record keeping, and then we suggested a work product review of 4 appraisals in 2 months.
And Rob, the record keeping, what was, I mean, the file looked fairly complete. Was there a record keeping issue?
Well, there's really no paired sales, no sort of analysis in there other than some fairly basic stuff. Like I said, like for the comp selection and like market data, when you use price to select your market data, that seems to be an issue.
I mean, but that would be covered in like appraisals of complex properties versus record keeping, unless it's been a while since I took the record keeping class. But I guess I'm just wondering if I'm not suggesting that that's not a class that would be taken, but we could have a number of classes, and then having the 4 reports that are to be supervised. It's a fairly extensive set of recommendations. If everybody believes that the record keeping class is necessary, then I'm okay with it. But if there weren't specific record keeping issues, then I'd suggest we omit the class. And again, maybe somebody can help me. The record keeping class, it's not necessarily talking about making adjustments and selection of data for paired analysis, et cetera, is it? I mean,
No, it covers everything that you're supposed to have in your work file.
Right.
And the one positive about that class is it's about an hour long and it doesn't cost anything.
Okay. All right. Well, then I'm good with it. I was thinking it was a 4-hour class. So. All right. Well, I'll make the recommendation or motion that we accept Ms. Waters' recommendations for coursework and
Great. Do I have a second?
I second it.
Great, thank you. And that was Clinton, Doreen. So in complaint number 2022-2256, oh, I have to have a vote. Do I have we have the motion, we have the second, may we have a vote, please, of the ayes?
I
Aye.
Any nays? All right, the motion passes on complaint number 2022-2256. The board votes to accept staff recommendation.
So board members, your last complaint matter is complaint matter H. This is case number 2023-160. In this case, the complainant alleged that the respondent used inappropriate comparable sales due to location, date of sale, and amenities. In reviewing the report, several potential use PAP violations were discovered. There appeared to be a scope of work, record keeping, and potential ethics rule violations. The respondent also failed to adequately analyze the subject's neighborhood and market area, the current market conditions, and the comparable sales. There was no documented analysis of the comparable sales selection. There was no support for the adjustments in the sales comparison approach. The cost approach was developed, but lacked any documented support for the opinions and conclusions. During the interview, the respondent indicated that 2 of the comps came directly from the builder of the subject, and the respondent considered invoking Tidewater. The respondent also stated that if he had come in at below the contract price, the builder could have turned him into the state. Potential violations are 12-61-710-1G, ethics rule, scope of work rule, record keeping rule, and standards rules 1 and 2. So this respondent has a prior 2016 dismissal with subsequent education that required completion of 7 hours of residential report writing and 4 hours of work file and record keeping. With this complaint, we are recommending a stipulation for diversion, a $500 fine, and coursework consisting of the 15-hour National Use PAP course, the board's reliable record keeping course, 7 hours or more in comparative analysis and supporting adjustments, and 7 hours or more of residential construction and the appraiser. Rob Walker is your investigator, and he's here to answer any questions that you may have.
This one also concerned me about the appraiser afraid that if he didn't get to the number that the builder would turn him in. I mean, I hate to hear that from either side, but can you, Rob, talk any more about what you learned from that?
Well, that was just kind of like in our course of like the selection of the comparable sales, because this was a new build property. The property actually went under contract, I believe, back in March, and the appraisal was in December. So he did get a couple of properties that were in the subject's subdivision that were chosen, well, he said, by the builder, and then he kind of ignored other properties that had closed more recently in the same subdivision and used, for some reason, comps 11 to 14 miles away that were 30 years old. So it seemed like he was more trying to justify the price, and there was really not a whole lot of market analysis showing how the market had, it appeared to have, from a layperson, it appeared to have changed since March of 2022 to December of 2022. And he didn't really do anything to show any significant analysis to that, and then just kind of, ignored that, some comps were 9 months old, didn't really
Right.
address any sort of a potential, date of sale adjustment.
But there
When
was
there were
never-
more current there were more current ones in the same, I mean, it's good not to use all the comps from the same complex, or the same subdivision, but he didn't use the most current ones, correct?
He didn't use the most current
Okay.
ones. There were other ones that were more current by the same builder in the same subdivision that had closed within the last couple of months, as opposed to things that were, 6 or 7 months old.
And if I remember correctly, Rob, there was never a direct threat from the builder that he was going to file a complaint with the board if there was a value issue. This was just an assumption made on the part of the respondent.
Exactly. That there was, and I actually called the sales office of the builder, and they did not seem to be overwhelmingly intimidating as far as comparable sales, or what comparable sales to use. They said they will suggest comparable sales, but I'd be surprised if there's a threatening tone to them.
Rob, correct me if I'm wrong, but some of the reports are starting to kind of blend together. Was there an aspect of senior communities or something that was brought up in the report or in his response?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
55 plus communities. Did he bring something up as it associates the 55 plus communities utilizing? I'm trying to find it in the file, but I believe he said something about omitting looking at more closer comps because he was focusing on 55 plus communities and other competing subdivisions.
Actually, the subject property wasn't a 55 plus community. It was, he really didn't address that at all in the report. And actually the other comps that he used, older comps, were not in 55 plus communities. It was his basic assumption that it seemed to me that the whole Castle Rock is the same market, regardless of where it is in there. And it's more of, the size, age, or maybe the size and location really had little or nothing to do with it.
But it probably should have been addressed.
It should have been addressed, because I looked up and there was 1,200 sales in his greater neighborhood area, which was considerable. You would think he could find some that were closer than 12 to 14 miles away.
And if I was a borrower, I'd want to know those most recent sales in the same subdivision. I mean, to me, that's a clear, just not the right way to go about that.
I mean, definitely a poor selection of comps. And, I think we probably all know the Castle Rock area, but like any other area, when you have a high concentration of available transactions, which you have in Castle Rock, going 14 miles away doesn't make sense. And having homes that are 30 years old versus new homes, again, just poor kind of perspective on selection of comp data. You'd never use a 30-year-old home to compare to a new home when you have a plethora of new homes, not just in this neighborhood, but there are a dozen other new neighborhoods. So I thought it was really poor selection of data, which could lead to a misleading conclusion. And then I think even more egregious than the selection of data that's 14 miles away was, as Patrice said, not at least having they could have included a summary chart of all the transactions that occurred in the subject neighborhood. They didn't have to analyze them all. So yeah, I thought it was just really poorly done.
All right, any other questions, comments, or concerns? All right, then in complaint number 2023-160, do I have a motion to accept staff recommendation?
I'll make the motion.
Thank you, Larry. Do I have a second?
This is Patrice, I'll second.
Thank you, Patrice. May I please have a vote of the ayes?
Aye.
And now a vote of the nays. All right, and complaint number 2023-160, the board agrees to accept staff recommendation. And before we move on, I wanted to welcome Chairman Pistelli to the meeting. Hey, Tony,
Oh,
You
sorry,
want to-
apologies for being late.
would you like to take over, sir?
No, ma'am, you're doing a good job.
Okay, all right, then we will move on to licensing matters. And seeing none, we will move on to expedited settlement program matters. And again, seeing none, we will move on to attorney general matters. And I suspect at this point, we need to go into an executive session.
Actually, Madam Chair, before you go into executive session, do you want to go back and address policy matter A?
Oh, thank you for reminding me, Marcia. Thank you. Under policy matters, update on Montana regulations and coursework regarding appraiser professionalism. Tony, we tabled this until you were here as well, so that you and Tony, you and Larry could discuss what it was you wanted to discuss with us.
Tony, I
Thank you.
intended to call you offline and never did, just to put this together. And I have to say, I've been traveling and haven't had a chance to address this. So I'm going to let you take this.
That's fine. And thank you, Madam Chair. And members, this really is a follow-on of a follow-on that we've talked about for many, many months probably over the course of the past couple of years about appraiser. I call it appraiser professionalism, turning reports in on time, being professional, doing what they say they're going to do, and then following up. And it's been a topic of the industry, especially when things were busier, and it's now manifested itself in complaints to HUD related to fair housing, about appraisers taking too long and kind of getting into a bias issue. A little bit unrelated, but still the prevalence is still here, even though the industry has slowed down a little bit. Other industries, the legal profession and others have professional standards. I think we're in kind of a dilemma that the state of Colorado does not allow for rules, or I'm probably not saying this right, or regulations or laws that go above what the federal law allows. Montana is a really good example of what could be done to enforce appraisers that never complete assignments. That I think one of the examples I presented almost 2 years ago had all uppercase letters with swear words and threats of, well, your file is going to get put on the bottom of my pile now because you're, blah, blah, blah. USPAP doesn't address professionalism. They've chosen not to do it. So maybe we've come to the end of this discussion, but I appreciate the executive director bringing up this matter. And if there's anyone that wants to, pursue it further, I'm all in favor of that, but I don't know.
Tony, I did ask someone in my office just to see if there was a class that they could find with regards to specifically appraisal professionalism, and they weren't able to find the class. I'll say I didn't look on my own. They were able to find some general professionalism classes, but not related to appraisal specifically. It seemed to be more HR related to young people coming out of college and what's expected in a professional environment, et cetera. But, so I don't know where we go from here with this either, but I see it particularly when we were so busy, but even today, as a major issue that we suffer from as an industry. And if we don't increase the professionalism in the industry and with the individuals in the industry, it continues to degrade the public's perception of our ability to do our jobs well. Not just the individual case that you were talking about, which was egregious, but the way that we've seen appraisers communicate and or not communicate even with the board. So, it would be great if there were a class that we could have as part of the our quiver to make recommendations for people to take. So I don't know if Marcia, if you or others want to see if there's a class, and maybe we don't have the authority to even recommend a class like that, but I think it would be very useful.
I did some searching as well, and I couldn't find anything that speaks to, I mean, it's like a mix of business management and customer service, because if I went into a business as a customer and I was sworn at and never provided the services that I was trying to engage, I wouldn't use that professional again. They would lose my business. So I wasn't able to find anything coursework wise that really speaks to those issues.
Madam Chair, the Appraisal Institute has a professional ethics class, and it doesn't focus directly on this, but to the degree that we could emulate or implement something similar to the Montana regulations, and I think at some point, because of, and I'm going to ramble just a bit, so be patient. We only see the bad appraisals. There's a lot of really good appraisers, but the perception in the industry of the users of our services is that appraisers are slow, they're bad, and eventually technology is going to replace appraisers unless we remain relevant. And if we're not professional, if we don't provide accurate services, we're going to be replaced by automated valuation models with technology on top of them that get about as close to what an appraisal is. And for certain risk scenarios, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have already started allowing things other than appraisals be the primary source of collateral validation, which is okay until it starts eating away at the majority of the volumes and the number of appraisers decline and appraisers become irrelevant. If we give them reason, them being our users, to not use us, I think we're doing a tremendous disservice to our profession. And really, we should all be professional. And if there's a way we can implement what Montana and other states have, what other professional associations have, I think it would be a good idea in Colorado. I think it would be a good idea in every state. I think it would be a good idea for the Appraisal Foundation to put professional standards of conduct in the ethics rule. I doubt they're going to do that, but if we can, that would be, I think, pretty good first step.
And that's something Colorado could legislate. I mean, if I know it's a monumental task, it seems, to get those things done, but I'm totally in agreement with Tony. I mean, we're degrading our own industry, and we're putting ourselves eventually out of work. So by not. And if there's something small that we could do by having a mandated course by the state of Colorado that is, compiled by one of the course writers with regards to professionalism in the industry, I think it would catch on and go move through the country, because it's prevalent everywhere.
So there's a couple things for Colorado to have something similar to Montana. They would have to pass legislation. And then as far as a mandated board class on professional conduct, that also would require a statute change, because we are held to the minimum threshold of what is set at the federal level for education requirements. So now, with that said, if one of the educators would like to come up with a professional conduct or professional ethics class that speaks to those issues and submit it for CE credit, that is something that we could evaluate under the regulations that we have to comply with course approvals. But there's nothing saying that they couldn't voluntarily take a class, or if there was a class available, that the board could start mandating that class as part of a disciplinary action.
All right. Well, what I'll volunteer to do sometime in the coming months. I don't know exactly when I'll have the time. I do have a relationship in McKissack. I don't know what the process would be to have a course written. They're in the business for selling courses and making money, but I just have to believe that there's not a state that if there were a class available for this that wouldn't utilize this class again in their quiver, because it's something that's I think rampant and prevalent around the country, that we have some lack of professionalism in our industry. So I don't know that we need to spend any more time. I'll reach out and see if I can do anything through McKissock. Tony, maybe you and I can talk offline just about how we might be able to foster some of this.
Absolutely. Happy to do that.
Larry, Tony, I'd be happy to throw my hat in the ring and provide any type of help or, opinion on that matter from an AMC standpoint, just due to the fact that, we deal with those types of matters from all facets on our side of the company. So it could have some interesting thoughts towards it. We also have our in-house appraisal counsel with some good experience there that could throw some ideas towards it as well, and some good verbiage. We've got some good policy writers and so on and so forth. So all these conversations are very thought provoking. I do agree that it is something that is prevalent and should have something done about it. It's just how we get there. And so, like I said, I'd be happy to help.
Okay, thank you.
And I just wanted to interject here. I'm sorry, because I hear board members talking about offline conversations dealing with board business, which would be an open meetings violation. So don't do that. If you want to talk about this in the future among the three of you, that would qualify as a board meeting. It's just subject to the open meeting law that you ask for it to be put on the agenda and talk about it here so it can be properly notified.
All right. So Gina, is that the case with anything we can't talk about? I mean, this isn't really, I don't know the extensiveness of this. And I was going to ask you that when I was saying we could talk offline. We're talking about the creation of a potential course. And I don't know that falls under the purview of, the Board of Real Estate Appraisers or BORA or whatever.
It would, under the current case law and what you just talked about in this meeting. I can speak with you, one-on-one about things that you can do. You mentioned speaking to a third party to ask them about, the potential of developing that course. That's a third party. That's not another board member. You can do that. But as far as this being something that you're considering maybe requiring or offering as a disciplinary tool, if you wanted someone to take it, I do think it would qualify as a board policy matter, which is what the case law and open meetings law discusses, about policy matters relating to your, professional regulation. So I do think it would, but again, I'm willing to speak with you. If you have any questions, you can always just ask me, hey, I thought I could do this. I could get together and talk about that, and we can troubleshoot ways to comply.
Right. All right.
Very good counsel. Thank you. And maybe in the abundance of caution, we don't have any meetings outside of our board meetings. However, it sounds like there's consensus among board members to do something related to this. So to the degree that we can do anything, maybe options could be presented for the next board meeting, and we could discuss openly if any of those are viable. Or if not, then we close this discussion and we move on to something else.
Well, my only thought is that Marcia correctly stated that in order to do this, you'd have to have a legislative change to require these professionals. And I think you have an upcoming sunset review. You might bring that up during that. Oftentimes they ask about these types of issues, and they usually do speak to you. They speak with the board members. That's one possible way. But really it is a legislative change in order to offer this and require it. And so, we can continue noticing and talking about it in a public meeting agenda, but as far as actually affecting any change, that legislative statutory fix would have to be in place.
All right. And that's very good advice. What's next? What's the next step to initiate legislative change? Can the department initiate the change? Does the board make a request to the legislature? Do we reach out to our individual legislators and explain the problem? How best to advance this? If the board has consensus to do something, what is possible rather than continued discussion? We've talked about this. I think we all agree.
Yeah.
What do we do next,
So,
if anything?
so the department has the ability to make recommendations as far as legislation is concerned, but those recommendations are evaluated at the department level because there's 10 different divisions that do a lot of different things, as far as also impacting a lot of different licensees and also consumers. So the department does have the ability to seek some legislative changes if necessary, but really something like this is probably more appropriately addressed by having the industry address the issue through legislation. So pretty typically what you see is the trade associations will work with the legislature to affect this type of change. Because what you also have to look at when you're dealing with departmentally backed legislation is Colorado's regulatory scheme is to regulate at the lowest threshold possible to protect consumers. And that's what this board already does by virtue of not going above and beyond the federal requirements. That's probably another argument for having maybe the industry look to have legislation run. And like the appraisal industry, I know that the Colorado Coalition of Appraisers is the kind of the collective group that does a lot of the representation with the legislature.
Would board direct the department to take action in this issue?
The board cannot direct the department to run legislation on this issue. The board can ask, but you can't direct the department to do that.
Does the board have rulemaking ability?
Well, you've got rulemaking ability, but your rulemaking ability is within the limits of your statutes. So you can't adopt a rule that goes beyond what your statutes allow you. So you couldn't mandate that every appraiser take a course in professional ethics unless the AQB mandated that type of education.
Do we interpret the ethics rule to include professional standards? Maybe this
But
is a
that's your
better conversation offline than in public, but I'm looking for a way to do it, not for a way to not do it or to make it more difficult. We have consensus here among appraisers and non-appraisers representing the Appraisal Institute, users of or appraisal profession industry, and users of appraisals. And I think we have common agreement that we should do something related to this. I'm just asking how best to do this. And I understand, I appreciate, and I understand appraisal industry groups would be the best. I don't think they're as motivated as we might be, or in as good a position as we might be.
I appreciate that. I just know the limitations within the department itself, because this leads to the department itself is a type 1 agency. So you can't tell as a board, although you're a type 1 board, you cannot tell a type 1 agency what legislation they have to run. There's a separation there. The agency's got its authorities and you have your authorities. So, and if you, I mean, it's definitely something as far as rulemaking is concerned, that's when we rely on our counsel to keep us within the boundaries of what you're able to do through rulemaking. And the goal of the AG's office is also to make sure that we stay within those boundaries so that we don't end up being sued for you guys going outside of your authority or having the legislature take offense because you have exceeded your authority and you have stepped on their toes.
Yep. Understood. So the use of the term direct was bad.
Yeah, you can ask.
Request?
Yes, we can request.
So same question, but with, let's swap out or request. Any and all possibilities, and if there's nothing, then there's nothing. We know we tried and we couldn't do anything. Unfortunate as it is, let's drop the issue. If there are things that we can do, I think we ought to pursue them.
So we can definitely make that request.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right, thanks for everyone's questions and comments. At this time, we are going into executive session. One thing I'm not sure of, Director Waters, do I need to make a motion to go into executive session?
Yes,
Madam
you
Chair.
do.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So I'm gonna remind you at the end rather than the beginning, remember to mute your microphones and to turn your cameras off when you go into the next link for executive session. At this time at 10:41, I'd like a motion.
Madam Chair, may I interject just a second, because you do need to read the script language to go into executive session under the opens meeting law. So I don't know if you have that. I do know.
I know, and my notes said you were going to give it to me and you never did. I'm
I
stressed
gave
out.
it to Tony because I thought he was going to be.
Oh, well then,
presiding.
Tony, would you be so kind, sir?
Absolutely, Madam Chair. It is May 4th, 2023, and the time is approximately 10:41 Mountain Time. This is the meeting of the Colorado Board of Real Estate Appraisers. I move that the board enter into executive session pursuant to section 24-6-402, 3A II of the Colorado Revised Statutes to receive legal advice on specific legal questions concerning the 3 attorney general matters identified on the board's meeting agenda, specifically outstanding LOCs and case numbers 2020-206 and 2020-2021. Why USPAP can be incorporated by state law. And third, case number 2023 CV 30143, Melinda Schminke v. Colorado Board of Real Estate and Board of Real Estate Appraisers. Do I have a second to the motion?
I have your second. This is Chris.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Hearing none, all unanimous vote on the record. And now we enter into executive session.
And members, before we meet up in the other interface, I think it's a Google Meets, I respectfully request a brief break for the bathroom, if that's okay. If we could just take a little minute.
Great idea.
Thank you. See y'all shortly.
Now you can. Now you can hear me?
Tony, this is David Donnelly. I can hear you on the main feed here, so just wanted to let you know that you are unmuted. Thanks.
All right, I think that's everyone. Welcome back. The board has exited the executive session and has returned to the regular session. Under the first issue, item A, I would like to make a motion that the case number 2020-2006 and 2020-2021, that the board move to rescind issuing any letters of concern in this case and cease communication with the complainant and consider this case closed.
Is there a second, board members?
Is that the correct way to say it, Marcia? That we're gonna,
So basically, you have already issued previous letters of concern. This would basically be so that you don't issue any further correspondence and the case is closed.
okay. Yeah, this is Patrice. I would second that motion.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. May I have a vote of the ayes, please?
Aye.
Aye.
And a vote of the nays. All right, hearing none, the motion passes. And I do not believe, please correct me if I'm wrong, that we don't need to do a motion for B or C.
You don't need to.
Thank you. In that case, I would need a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I'll make the motion. Larry.
I'll second that. This is Patrice.
All right. All right. We have a motion to adjourn the meeting with a second. May I have a vote of the ayes
Aye.
and the nays? All right, we will adjourn and we will see everybody July 6th at 9:00 a.m.
Everyone.
Thanks,
Thank
board
you.
members.
Everybody.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.